2025, data from multiple studies now put stress as the main driver in roughly 8 out of 10 healthcare visits, a trend experts link to chronic psychological tension that starts before most of us have even had breakfast. Much of it comes from the same unexamined thoughts playing on repeat in the background. This video brings together recent neuroplasticity findings highlighted by Dr. Joe Dispenza and his research team, plus practical morning steps you can use before 10 a.m. And the best part, there's a 10-minute habit that targets the brain states keeping you stuck. We'll start by looking at how those states are formed. The 95% program, your autopilot personality. Dr. Joe Dispenza often says that by the time we reach 35, roughly 95% of our automatic personality is already wired in, meaning that almost all of our responses are habitual, running without our conscious say-so. This isn't just about being set in your ways. It's the result of the brain's tendency to conserve energy by turning repeated thoughts, feelings, and actions into well-established circuits. As the old neuroscience line goes, neurons that fire together wire together. The more a pathway is used, the faster and easier it becomes to travel. Think about the way you might check your phone first thing in the morning. After enough repetition, your hand moves before you've even registered the decision. Autopilot is exactly that, a network of memorized patterns that runs the show when you're not paying attention. You wake, reach for the phone, read the first email in your inbox, and already you're feeling the same blend of stress or annoyance you felt yesterday. It's not just behavior, it's the emotions tethered to the behavior. Each cycle reinforces the grooves between linked brain cells. The good news is that neuroplasticity means these grooves aren't permanent. Just as they're built through repetition, they can be reshaped by practicing different thoughts, reactions, and emotional states. The challenge is that your current wiring resists interruption. The brain treats familiar patterns, whether useful or destructive, as the safer choice simply because they're known. If you've spent years meeting frustration with irritation, your nervous system considers that your default survival move. Changing that feels awkward at first, not necessarily because the new choice is wrong, but because the old one is comfortable in its familiarity. That initial discomfort is normal. With repetition, it fades, and the new pathway starts to feel more natural. When you realize this, the goal becomes catching autopilot in the act. You can't alter what you don't notice, so the work begins with spotting the exact moment you're about to run the old script. It might be the flash of defensiveness in a conversation or the tension in your chest as you open an email. Pausing there, even briefly, breaks the momentum. In that gap, you can choose a different thought or action. Each time you make that choice, you weaken the old pathway and strengthen the new one. Initial changes in brain activity can happen faster than most expect. Under repeated, deliberate practice, adaptation begins in days. Some studies even show measurable shifts within a week. But those early shifts are just the start. The real transformation comes from consistency, because each repetition acts like a new brick in the road you're trying to build. Over time, the new route becomes smoother to travel than the old one. This process doesn't require overhauling your entire personality at once. It can start with one specific reaction you want to change. Maybe it's the frustration you feel in traffic, or the self-criticism that surfaces after a work mistake. Interrupting a single pattern repeatedly can lead to wider changes, because your attention to that moment sharpens your overall awareness. The more you see the machinery of your own habits at work, the harder it is to believe they're immovable. Even so, the familiarity of old emotional states often pulls people back in. They feel more themselves, inside the same frustration, worry, or resignation they've carried for years, not realizing that these are learned responses rather than core truths. Recognizing that tension, knowing you could leave the loop, but still wanting to return to it, is a sign you've started to see the program as separate from who you are. And once you see that distinction, a bigger question starts to emerge. If so much of who we think we are is habitual, why would we keep running the same patterns when they're making us unhappy? The answer has less to do with logic and more to do with how the brain gravitates toward the familiar, even when the familiar isn't good for us. Why we cling to familiar misery. Think about the sinking feeling some people get late on a Sunday. That quiet dread builds as the hours tick toward Monday morning, tied to a job they've disliked for years. Every week, they tell themselves they'll make a change, but the same routine restarts and nothing shifts. From the outside, it looks like avoidance. From the inside, it feels strangely familiar. That familiarity is the real glue. It's not logic that keeps them there, but an emotional state their mind and body have learned to expect. The brain doesn't only adapt to repeated actions, it adapts to repeated feelings. Spend years steeped in frustration, anxiety, or resentment, and your nervous system adjusts to a constant trickle of cortisol and adrenaline. Researchers describe how the brain's stress chemistry can become self-reinforcing, a negative reinforcement loop, so you return to similar emotions simply because the body expects them. It's not about enjoyment. It's about the comfort of the expected, even when the expected makes you miserable. That's why comfort zones are rarely truly comfortable. They're not built for ease, they're built from what's familiar. Step outside them, and your nervous system reacts like it's sensing a threat. If you're used to a low-grade irritability, waking up calm can feel off balance. So the mind nudges you back. You might find yourself rehashing an old disagreement, scanning for emails likely to upset you, or activating memories that guarantee the sensation you know. Before long, you're back in the emotional landscape your brain labels home. This doesn't happen as a conscious choice. No one sets out in the morning to drag themselves into the same mood just to keep it consistent. But neural pathways that have been fired thousands of times are the quickest to reactivate. The transition from a minor inconvenience to full frustration is smooth because repetition built that shortcut. In a way, following that shortcut feels satisfying, not from pleasure, but from the ease of returning to something known. Over time, these patterns start to blend into the way you see yourself. Co-workers, family, and friends reflect them back. Being the overwhelmed one or the irritable one becomes part of how people interact with you. That kind of social reinforcement strengthens the loop and makes the emotion feel like an unshakable identity. What makes it even harder to break is how those emotions can come to feel like your most authentic self. If stress or vigilance has been your baseline for years, a shift away from it can register as boredom or numbness. You may find yourself mistaking calm for something unnatural, just because it doesn't match the state you've rehearsed. Dr. Joe points to memory research suggesting people steadily embellish negative memories, partly why we replay them, which makes familiar feelings even more accessible. The brain will push you toward them, not because they're helpful, but because they make you feel like you. That's the hidden trap. Telling yourself, "This is just how I am," can actually be a sign you're in an emotional habit. Often it's not the job or the relationship alone keeping you locked in place. It's the practice of cycling back to the same inner response regardless of what's happening externally. Once you start to see those responses as habits rather than traits, they become something you can work with instead of something you're stuck inside. A practical first move is to catch the pattern early. The sooner you notice it taking hold, the easier it is to interrupt. One way to do this is to watch for a physical cue before the emotion peaks. Maybe your jaw tightens, your breath gets shallow, or your shoulders pull in. Make that your signal. The moment you catch that cue, pause. Simply naming it buys you a fraction of time before the full reaction floods in. Say you've mentally quit your job dozens of times. Notice exactly what lights the fuse. Is it a request from the same client? A tone in a recurring meeting? If you feel your jaw set in that moment, that's the flag. Instead of proceeding down the familiar slope into resentment, use the pause to shift attention to something neutral or constructive. The more often you disrupt the chain, the weaker it becomes. The same applies in relationships. If defending yourself in an argument feels like your place, your brain may subtly seek opportunities to create that situation. That could mean misreading a comment as criticism or revisiting a long-settled disagreement. Recognizing your early physical tell there, maybe clenched hands or a rush of heat, is the same leverage point. Staying in a different emotional gear long enough for it to feel less alien is the practice. At the start, these new states won't necessarily feel good. Calm might seem empty. Optimism could feel naive. Gratitude may get countered by your mind listing what's still wrong. But if you can hang with them for moments at a time, your system begins recalibrating. Becoming fluent in a new set of feelings takes repetition, just like the old ones did. What's often most convincing to people is seeing how much of their true self is just the version produced by the brain on autopilot. The thoughts, the chemical responses, the physical posture, These are assembled routines, not immutable facts. Feeling most like yourself may be the strongest indicator that you're deep in a habit loop. Seeing that turns those moments from a kind of safety into a signal. This is the cage. And cages lose their strength when you apply consistent small breaks in the bars. Choosing not to replay an irritation, even once, is a small act that tells the brain another option exists. These shifts usually go unnoticed by anyone else at first. They happen internally, quietly, and that's fine. Subtle consistency builds a new network until it competes successfully with the old. Eventually, the emotional vocabulary broadens. The tension that felt automatic starts feeling optional. The identity wrapped around certain emotions loosens. And what used to be your comfort zone stops acting like a hard border because you've proven to yourself that familiarity and well-being aren't the same thing. Understanding this sets up the context for why those persistent stress patterns matter so much on a larger scale, and why they're showing up everywhere right now. The stress epidemic of 2025. Recent 2025 reporting and industry summaries place stress as a primary factor in roughly 78% of healthcare visits, reflecting what many clinicians call the stress-related care burden. This isn't an abstract mind-body connection talking point. It means that in nearly 8 out of 10 appointments, a doctor is treating someone whose condition is significantly shaped by stress. Chronic stress is linked with sleep disruption, elevated inflammation markers, and worse cardiovascular risk. So the downstream health impact is real. And at the core of many cases is not a sudden external crisis, but a stress response rehearsed in the mind until the body treats it as fact. Thought stress is exactly that, repeatedly running mental scenarios in enough detail that the brain and body respond as though they are happening now. Heart rate jumps, stress hormones flood the system, inflammation begins to rise. You don't have to leave your bed for this to start. You could open your eyes and immediately play through an upcoming meeting that might go poorly, and before breakfast, your physiology is already braced for an event that hasn't happened. Because these rehearsals are so common, they often go unnoticed. You might glance at the clock and, without thinking, replay a tense interaction from yesterday, picture the bottleneck on your commute, or imagine a difficult conversation later. Those quick mental flashes are enough to activate the stress response. By the time the day has properly begun, your internal state is operating in emergency mode without a real-world trigger in sight. The scale of the problem is not driven just by genuine bad days. It's driven by the sheer number of people spending hours of mental time in situations that don't exist outside their own imagination. A body designed to handle short, infrequent spikes in stress chemistry struggles when that mode is engaged over and over across the day. You can step into a morning meeting already drained because you've effectively attended it in your head half a dozen times before. When your actual performance suffers, the mind labels the earlier worry as justified, reinforcing the cycle. One reason change is slow is that people tend to identify stress only when symptoms are glaring: headaches, irritability, fatigue, often hours after the biological cascade began. The entry point is quieter: a repeated thought about a deadline while making breakfast, a half-second flash of resentment about an earlier comment, a spike of anticipation when a calendar alert pops up. Those small cues tell your body that action is needed, and it prepares accordingly. Even something as minor as a notification sound can set the chain in motion. Before you've unlocked your phone, your mind may predict who messaged, recall past conversations, and anticipate the tone or content. Those predictions often pull emotional memory along with them: frustration, anxiety, reluctance, and the stress chemistry arrives before the screen lights up. The actual message may be inconsequential, but by then your physiology is already responding. The preemptive nature of thought stress is what makes it so damaging. By the time the event you were dreading takes place, you arrive chemically depleted, less able to handle it well. If it goes badly, the outcome matches the body state you've been in all morning, cementing the association between stress rehearsal and a belief in its usefulness. In reality, it's costing resilience and impairing recovery. Not all mornings need to start this way. The point of control comes in recognizing those first small moments when the mind begins rehearsing. You might notice your shoulders creeping toward your ears in the shower, or your breathing shallowing while you make coffee. If you catch the cue and change focus before the imaginary scene develops, you stop the cascade before it commits fully. That's why the pre-10 a.m. ritual is so strategic, because you can short-circuit the rehearsal before your biology commits to it. Yet for many, the day begins by running an immediate highlight reel of yesterday's worst moments or tomorrow's biggest concerns. Lying still, the mind cues up an old disagreement and plays it forward into a confrontation. The body responds as instructed. Hands tighten, blood pressure lifts, digestion stalls. The loop is so familiar it feels normal, but over weeks and months it leaves traces. Tension patterns in muscles, immune shifts, digestive issues, cardiovascular strain. These outcomes appear on medical charts under varied names, but the invisible to and from path to thought stress often lies underneath. Breaking that path doesn't require ignoring reality. It means putting a gap between an initial thought and the full-blown crisis rehearsal it tends to summon. Even catching that once in a morning matters. Every interception is a moment where your body is spared unnecessary emergency mode, and each spared reaction makes it easier to return to baseline after real challenges. While the 78% figure is sobering from a public health perspective, it doesn't define each individual's future. The mechanism is specific, and that means it can be interrupted. The earlier in the chain you intervene, the less of your day is handed over to events that haven't occurred. Over time, the nervous system learns not to commit resources to every passing worry. This understanding forms the groundwork for a different question, one with measurable, surprising implications. If imagining a stressful future can provoke a full body stress response, what else might the mind be able to produce without a single step being taken? That's where the conversation turns next. The science of mental rehearsal. Can the brain lay down new wiring without the body ever moving? Can you strengthen a skill or a habit entirely in your head without lifting a finger? Current neuroscience suggests that you can, and the effect is far from trivial. High-resolution fMRI scans in 2025 have documented both functional and structural shifts in the brain from nothing more than vivid, deliberate mental rehearsal. The same regions involved in movement, timing, focus, and even emotion regulation activate during clear imagining in patterns that closely resemble physical execution. With repetition over days, these patterns grow more defined, almost as though the brain is storing the instructions for a skill it hasn't yet physically performed. From the brain's point of view, action is simply a sequence of neural firings. If you imagine that sequence with enough sensory richness and consistency, you engage many of the same pathways that physical practice would recruit. That activation prompts synapses to strengthen, which is the same process underpinning physical learning. This is why researchers, and the workshops cited by Dr. Joe Dispenza, point to examples where people who mentally rehearsed a piano exercise developed brain circuits similar to those who physically practiced. The brain doesn't fully distinguish between vivid imagining and actual doing, especially when the rehearsal is structured and repeated. This principle has long been used in elite performance. Top competitors and musicians compress high-pressure scenarios into mental run-throughs until the exact timing and emotional state feel familiar. A tennis player can rehearse a serve in the mind's eye until grip, aim, and follow-through feel automatic. A violinist may sit in silence but still feel the strings under their fingers and hear the timbre of each note. The same short, targeted sessions they rely on can be adapted to everyday goals, whether that's handling a difficult conversation at work or running a morning meeting with calm authority. Mental rehearsal works beyond motor skills. It can be a direct way to shape the version of yourself you want to show up in daily life. Running through not just the actions, but the emotions you want to match them, activates brain circuits tied to identity. If you picture walking into a room with relaxed shoulders, steady breathing, and clear focus, while also feeling what calm confidence is like, you're teaching your nervous system to recognize and reproduce that chemistry. Mental rehearsal won't replace all the benefits of physical practice, but it can produce many of the same circuit-level changes, especially when the imagery is immersive and repeated. The latest studies follow participants who began their day with only a few minutes of structured internal practice on a desired trait or behavior. After several weeks, brain scans showed better connectivity between the prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and control, and the limbic system, which governs emotion. That connection allowed the rehearsed state to hold longer in real-world conditions. It stopped being something they had to force and started to arise without conscious prompting. Biological markers shifted as well. Heart rate variability, which reflects adaptability to stress, improved in people practicing calm responses to imagined stress triggers. Inflammatory markers dipped, suggesting that the body's baseline state was aligning with the chemistry of the new rehearsed identity. The mind wasn't only picturing a different self, it was sending the body consistent prompts to adapt to that model. For mental rehearsal to be effective, the process itself needs structure. A simple 3-step approach can anchor it. First, make the scene sensory. Engage sight, sound, touch, even smell, feel your posture, hear the background noises, sense the light in the room. Research consistently shows that multisensory imagery strengthens the neural imprint. Second, run the event in your head from start to finish with enough detail that it feels coherent. Whether it lasts 15 seconds or 2 minutes, there should be a clear beginning, middle, and end. Third, repeat it a fixed number of times, 3 to 5 clean, uninterrupted runs, to prime the brain to expect that pattern. Each repetition builds toward familiarity, the same way physical drills do. Adding emotional tone to the rehearsal is critical. If the goal is composure under pressure, locate the feeling of calm focus and keep it present as you run the scene. If the aim is confident leadership, feel the poise that would accompany that role. The body reads those chemical states alongside the imagined actions, creating a more complete, save file for future use. Sensory layering makes a marked difference in results. Athletes who can feel the weight of the equipment in their grip, musicians who can hear the room's reverberation, and people rehearsing personal changes who picture the clothes they're wearing or the texture of the chair beneath them. These details increase activation in sensory and motor networks. The more complete the simulated environment, the more the brain treats it as lived experience. It's worth noting that mental rehearsal isn't idle fantasy. Daydreaming wanders. Effective rehearsal stays deliberate, detailed, and consistent. You set the parameters before you begin, frame the experience as if it is taking place now, and keep attention on the chosen sequence. With repetition over days and weeks, the brain begins accepting it as a familiar option, which means you're more likely to act in alignment with it without strain. This is also why trying to change, on the fly, during actual high-stress moments is often less reliable. In those moments, old wiring tends to win because it's the quickest route available. When you've already built and strengthened an alternative in a calm state, the nervous system has another path ready. Responding differently no longer feels like improvisation. It feels like following a map you've traced many times. The outcome, when practiced consistently, can look like instinct from the outside. You walk into a situation and behave in a new way without having to think about it step by step. But that instinct is actually trained behavior, rehearsed in advance until your body and mind treat it as the default. Small, regular sessions done with clarity and sensory precision shift what your system considers normal. As you begin to use mental rehearsal this way, you're not only shaping future actions, you're conditioning the baseline state you carry into each day. The brain circuits you strengthen, and the chemistry you normalize will influence how you meet both predictable and unexpected events. And there's a period of the day when your brain is especially receptive to laying down these new patterns, before it shifts into the high-speed mode that dominates most waking hours. That timing is the next piece of the picture. Morning brain chemistry, prime time to rewire. In the first few minutes after you wake, your brain tends to be in slower, more receptive rhythms, close to the theta and alpha range, before it speeds into the faster beta activity that drives most of the day. That light, open state is an unusually good time for reprogramming the mind because you can reach the more automatic part of the brain quickly, and short, repeated training here can pay off disproportionately. Don't reach for your phone first, use that liminal window for practice instead. This window closes fast. Once you start engaging with demands, notifications, or even just running through your task list in your head, your brain's pace accelerates. Adrenaline rises, familiar emotional patterns return, and whatever you begin to focus on will set the tone. Feed this period the same unexamined inputs you've used for years, and you keep rehearsing the same wiring. Choose deliberate, specific inputs, and you give new circuits a chance to take root. Many people don't recognize how vulnerable this early state is. A phone check seconds after waking often floods the mind with other people's urgency. A headline designed to provoke, a feed that stirs comparison, a notification that stokes unfinished business. But those first reactions aren't neutral. They're early morning drills on the emotional states you'll carry. And the more often they're rehearsed, the more reflexive they become. Even something small can shape the day. Imagine opening a message that irritates you while your brain is still in that receptive rhythm. You attach that feeling to your bedroom light, your morning posture, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Over weeks, that pairing becomes automatic. Your body can turn on a low-grade irritation just from waking in the same environment, even if no new message appears. It's a habit triggered purely by context. The advantage is that these habits were learned and can be replaced in the same state they were installed. That early rhythm bypasses some of your brain's critical filters, so intentional inputs land deeper. You can give that space over to algorithms optimized for disruption, or you can make a specific choice about what's allowed in. A pre-10 a.m. ritual works here because it acts like a directed upgrade to your operating system. Instead of letting random cues dictate the first emotional and mental track of the day, you set in motion the one you want. That first state will ripple out, influencing what you notice, how you read challenges, and how easily you avoid falling back into old stress patterns. The ritual itself doesn't have to be elaborate.